Welcome back, fellow Lumineers, to be our guest. I'm as surprised as you are. I am not, in fact, dead. I know I disappeared for almost a year. At some point, I will tell the story. Nobody wants to hear it, mind you. But at some point, I will feel cathartically obligated to share where I've gone for the last year. But in the meantime, I'm at least temporarily back. Who knows? I want to talk about Limited. I'm not going to get into a huge rant today about everything. I want to talk about Draft, because honestly, there's a ton of people out there talking about Constructed, talking about Challenge, talking about set champs, league play, all that good stuff. And I like to think I'm doing pretty well with that. I'm doing all right, but at the end of the day, do I have anything more to contribute than all of the amazing people out there that are already sharing great tips and tricks and strategies for Constructed? Probably not. At some point, I'm going to want to talk about it just because I feel like it. But until then, there's a real deficit of talk about Draft and limited formats. And 40born, props to you guys. I've been watching for a while in the shadows, and really appreciate the work that you did. And with them stepping away, I'm like, all right, somebody's got to pick it up and run with it. And heck, why not? So let's talk about Draft. Why should I talk about Draft? Why am I qualified to talk about Draft? Why should you give a rat's beep about me talking about Draft? Well, because I'm here. Because who else do you have? No, but genuinely, so I've been a drafter in Magic the Gathering for decades. That's always been my favorite format. I love it dearly. I've never really felt the urge to compete majorly professionally or competitively in that, so it's always just been Magic Arena, and before that, just FNMs and wherever they were doing drafts at my local scene. But always felt really comfortable in the drafting phase. I will say that any deficit in my draft game is the actual playing part. My drafting, I feel like, is top-notch. If we just ended at the end of the draft and there was awards for best deck drafted, I feel like I would win almost every time. It's when we get to the part about the playing that I still feel pretty good, but I know that's where my game's letting me down. So let's talk about the draft, and you could watch me maybe play some games at some point in time with draft decks. But for now, let's just talk about draft theory. So this is going to be an in-depth draft review. I'm going to do each color one at a time. But I also want to make like a summary one, because I know not everyone wants to watch me wax and wane for 45 minutes on a one color draft review. And please let it not be 45 minutes. I'm going to try and keep it brief, everybody. But ultimately, I know not everyone's got time for that or even the desire for that. So I'm going to do it at some point afterwards, kind of a summary piece on just the hits, right? Just the stuff that you definitely want to be drafting highly, and then just know that the rest is kind of chaff. And I'll try and talk through a bit of thought process, but I will probably direct people back to these videos for more in-depth analysis. But I'll try and give a more summary one later. So if you're not interested in spending that time with us right now, just hang tight. After I've got all the in-depth reviews out, I'll put more of a summary one out, and I'll try to keep that one brief, like 20-25 minutes for the entire set in terms of the key ones that you want to be looking for in draft. Sound like a plan? All right, I'm just assuming everyone's nodding at home. I'm just assuming everyone's like, yeah, Heath, let's go, let's do it. Be our guest, we're back. Yes, I've been so excited. I've been waiting for this day, Heath. Yeah, everyone's saying that. All right, let's get into it. Without further ado and further, let's get into it. So naturally, we're going to start with Amber, right? And we're just going to go through one card at a time, and obviously the time I spent will be dependent on the quality of the card. So let's start with Coda here. Talkative Cub, adorable, love that they've included Brother Bear in the set, but at the end of the day, this is hot garbage. I mean, it's inkable, we'll give it that. It's 2 lore, fantastic, right? We're trying to get to 20. 2 lore is twice as good as 1, but this will die so easily. Let's talk about the ability for a second. During opponents' turns, you can't lose lore. There are a couple cards, even at common, that can cause you to lose lore in this set. The chances of that being relevant, so infinitesimally small, because the ones that do are kind of garbage themselves. And then this is going to die really easily to a 1-drop. And there's a 1-drop we're going to be talking about a little bit later that this won't even trade with. So yeah, this dies to the 1/3s. This dies to the 2/3s. Real easy. And yeah, you're probably getting 2 lore out of it, so it's probably better than most actions that just get you 2 lore, which we'll talk about later with Amethyst, but yeah, not good. So this is like a D level card. Alright, Nala, Mischievous Cub, 0/4, 1 lore for 1. So not trading with anything unless you've got support. But 4 willpower at a 1-drop is something to consider, right? Like, this isn't a good card, don't get me wrong. But I would argue this is better than the previous card. This is probably going to net you, whereas, you know, the previous card's going to net you 2 lore and die. This might net you at least, you know, a couple of lore before they can deal with it at 1-drop instead of 2. And there's times where they're focusing on other things, and this can get in there easily, especially on the play for 3-4 lore. It's still a D, but I would argue this might be a relatively high D. So, yeah. I suppose I should talk about it at some point, and maybe I'll try to shoehorn this in somehow at the beginning of the video. But let's talk about the ratings for a second. This is going to be... I'm still going to be trying to figure out my editing skills again. Recollect that if I can. But let's talk about the ratings for a second. So effectively, I'm going to have kind of the A, B, C, D, F rating system, right? So A's are kind of the bombs and just high quality cards that you really want to go after as first picks, right? B's are going to be, I'm happy to have these in my deck, but I'd be kind of remorseful to have them as my first pick. Not ideal, but I'll take it as a first pick. C's are solid, you know, run-of-the-mill. You're going to have them in your deck, but they're not exactly ones you're excited about. You're hoping to wheel these, right? For anyone that doesn't know what wheel is, that means get them back in the kind of the second round of the pack, right? So if there's 8 people in your draft pod, you're going to get some cards back from your original pack all the way around. That's called the wheel, right? So C cards are really the cards you want to be picking up in the last half of the pack. D cards are cards that you will have in your deck, but you'd really rather not. D cards better be inkable. Like, I can't think of too many situations where I'd label a card as a D that's uninkable, because at that point, you don't want it in your deck, and you can't use it as ink, so why the heck is it in there? It's almost certainly going to be an F, right? And F is just don't play it. And there might be a few inkable cards in there that are just so bad that I can only hope that you have enough D cards that are inkable to not have to include it. But obviously, if you're low on inkables, use some Fs that are inkable if need be, but try to never play them. Just only ever use them as ink, right? So that's kind of the rating system. So going on here, we got Prince Naveen. So it's really important to have a grasp of kind of what are the vanilla stat lines. When we think about evaluating a card like this, what are the vanilla stat lines? And the precedent for those were really set in set 1, but they've pushed the envelope a little bit. But by and large, you're 3/3 with 2 lore. Set 1, think back, and since then they've printed more of them, is usually a 3-cost inkable, right? So I'm paying 1 more for Prince Naveen, and it's uninkable to get the Singer 6 and the free song. There are so few songs you want to play in this set in draft. And even if there were, the likelihood of you having a volume enough of them for Prince Naveen's abilities to be relevant are so slim. So Prince Naveen being uninkable, for me, is almost an F. I'll put him in D just because a 3/3/2 lore body, if you're really struggling for characters of quality, is at least a decent body, but he probably should be an F. Like, you shouldn't be including an uninkable that is effectively just a 3/3/2 lore. Support is a questionable ability. Sometimes it feels so good. Oh my gosh, I ran my 1-drop into your 5-drop because of support. Feels real good. But here's the problem with evaluating cards in draft, is too many people focus on the best case scenario. Oh man, if I have this on the board and I've got a 1-drop and they've got an exerted 5-drop and I can, trade with the 5-drop, that's amazing. Yeah, that's fantastic. But the likelihood of you having that exact situation with this on the board, able to quest, to give the support, just doesn't come up enough for it to be worth valuing particularly highly. Now, I would still put this as a C because it's still a reasonable ability, right? It's still an ability that will help you from time to time. And worst case scenario, it's not a terrible body. The vanilla stat line for a 4-drop Inkable is 3/4 lore. So I'm giving up 1 lore for the support. And even those 4-cost 3/4 lores I would put as a C, but maybe a higher C. So for me, this is a C, coming real close to a D. I'm not looking to draft this card, right? If I've got this card, it's because I ran out of better options and there were some good drafters in front of me that picked the best cards, right? So don't hesitate to put this in your deck, but you should be getting this like last pick, second last pick. Well, maybe not. That's when you get the uninkable garbage. You should definitely be getting this in the last, quarter of the pack. And try not to play it. Again, the ability, we have to ignore this. The likelihood of this being relevant, and we've already established the coda is not good in this set, is pretty low. So it's a 2-cost 1/4, 1 lore. So the vanilla stat line that I prefer is the 2-cost 2/3, 1 lore. I actually really like that in any set, in any draft. It's just a reliable second turn play that can usually take care of their 1-drop without trading, right? It stays on the board, gets rid of their 2/2s. So I prefer that. This one's going to stick around a little bit longer, but it's not really going to trade with anything. So whereas I would have the 2-cost 2/3, 1 as kind of a low B, mid B, this for me is definitely a C, and I would argue a low C. Again, not a card that I want to have in my deck, but I'd be fine to have it. It's just not really lighting the world on fire there. 2-cost 2/3s though. Yeah. Alright. So 1-cost 2/2, 1 lore. A very common vanilla stat line. There's at least a few in every set, right? And honestly, so many people overlook these. They take these late when there's nothing else. And they don't really process how happy they are to have these at 1. And how it's even not a terrible thing to top deck later in the game, because the game goes so quickly, especially in draft, that even if you're drawing this turn, 5, 6, 7, you're probably able to play it in addition to 1 or 2 other cards, especially if you're drawing cards, which we're going to be incentivized to do. You're not drawing it on turn 12 because we're not getting to turn 12, right? And if we are, at that point, you probably just need 1 lore and you'll take anything. But the power of this controlling the early game, or getting some early lore, and still probably trading with something, and maybe even a 2-drop or a 3-drop, right? Remember our 2-cost 2/2 lore that Coda is very similar to, right? Yeah, I'd be happy to play this on 1, quest once, and then trade with their 2/2 lore, and keep my 2-drop on the board. Especially in this set, I've found that the number of 4 and 5 drops that we're really happy to be playing in our deck is really high. So if I'm wanting to draft a lot of 4 and 5 drops, that's not great for my curve. And so if that's the case, I have to make sure that my early game is not suffering, that I'm not waiting till turn 3 to drop anything of substance. So I actually rate these relatively high. I would rate this as a B, and I would be drafting this kind of middle of the pack, right? I want this in picks like 4 through 8, somewhere in there, and I'm actually pretty happy. Now, if you've got some weak drafters, they might be passing you stuff that you're like really tempted to take over this. But if you've already drafted 2 5-drops, because there's some amazing 5-drops in this set, picks 1 and 2, and then this is pick 4, and there's another great 5-drop, you should probably take this, right? You really need to be careful about just overloading your deck with too many big plays, right? All right, moving on here. Now, as opposed to his compatriot, the other Northern Moose, Sook here, 4-drop, 4/4/1 lore is a common stat line again. Not one as I'm as excited about as the 1-drop 2/2s like Vanellope there, but still really solid. Here's the problem. What did I just say? There are a ton of really great quality 4-drops and 5-drops in this set. So if that's the case, whereas I might normally rate this as like a high C, this is dropping down for me a little bit. I haven't gotten to the point, once I've done all this and kind of got it on camera, I'll compile this all into a chart about kind of where I think they lie respectively. So I don't know where this lies in the C right now, but for me, my expectation is it's going to be a relatively lower C, just because of the number of other 4-drops you're going to want to draft. Lilo, we just talked about support, and support not being great. You know where support's really poor? On a 1-strength character. So, 2-drop, 1/3. It just dies way too easily, right? If your opponent's smart, they're not going to let you take advantage of this support in the early game. Alright, our board's hardly developed at all. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to hold off questing for a turn. You quest with her, and then I just obliterate for very little cost on my end. Yeah, this is a D for me. I love Lilo. I'm sorry, Lilo. But, yeah, your card's trash. Speaking of trash, if the 2-drop 2/2 lore is bad, then how about just 1 lore instead? Yes, adjusting strength isn't insignificant, but it's almost insignificant, which is to say, this character questing once to adjust my strength by 1, and then I get to take it out with my 1-drop 2/3 that's coming up in Ruby. Feels so good. Much like support, I'm going to play around this if I need to. And yeah, there's power in forcing your opponent to play around it, but there's plenty of times where it's not even going to matter. It's like, okay, you can reduce my strength 1, but there's still enough to trade with every single character on your board, especially in the early game, right? So, no. Sorry, Vanellope, this one's a D. Stick with the 2/2/1. Fix-It Felix, on the other hand, this guy is fantastic. So, we already had, in many occasions, the 3-drop 3/3/1 Bodyguard. And still pretty good. Bodyguard in draft is an amazing ability. Because oftentimes, you're going to want to draft aggressive characters. Like, if I've got the 2-drop 2/2/2 lore, I feel a lot better about having that card if I've got Felix to follow it up, right? You're going to have characters that are vulnerable. We're going to talk about one in Amethyst that is just a bomb when paired with Bodyguard. On its own, can be kind of questionable. So Bodyguard can be a huge asset. It effectively gives your other characters evasive. We're going to talk about, once we get to some evasive characters, how powerful evasive is. Bodyguard almost gives your other characters evasive, and even better than if your opponent's got evasive characters. So, huge asset. Now, do we prefer a 3/3 Bodyguard or a 2/4? Well, if our whole goal is to protect the characters behind us, then I would argue we probably want the 2/4. I mean, the 3/3 worked really well, and obviously, this isn't going to trade with as much or take care of as much, but especially turn 3, there's not much that it's not trading with. And even if we're dealing 2 damage to a 2/3 or something like that, not the end of the world, because they're going to have to run another character into it, and it's their 2/2 and their 2/3 running into this, and you only trade with one of them, but you're still dealing 2 damage to a 3 willpower character as well, and they've had to run 2 characters into it. They're using time and resources that they could be using for questing, or challenging your more vulnerable characters. Love this. So for me, this is a B, but I would categorize this as a high B, almost a low A, which is, I wouldn't be ashamed to first pick this. I wouldn't be happy with it. That's, for me, the quality of the B, is I'm not happy to first pick this, but I certainly wouldn't be ashamed to be. Alright, Gazelle. So again, we talked about what's the vanilla stat line. 3 cost 3/3/2 lore, right? Singer 5, we already established, probably not all that relevant in this set. Very irrelevant in this set, especially for drafting, right? So, although this might be good in constructed, maybe, right? We don't care about this in draft. So I'm losing 1 strength, which I'm already not... I say the vanilla stat line is 3-drop, 3/3/2 lore. I'm not saying that's good. I'm saying that's the unacceptable vanilla stat line, right? So I'm already not thrilled about that particular stat line, but then combine that with reducing 1 strength, and this is absolutely a D for me. Included is ink, and occasionally, if the board's clear and you can drop this and quest for a couple lore, maybe twice, then I'm happy about that, right? But if you're dropping this on turn 3, you're feeling real bad. All right. Fix It Felix Jr. 5 cost, 4/5, 1 lore. And by the way, looking at this from afar, this always looked like little, like, ponytails, braids on the side of his head from a distance. I'm only just realizing now that this is a strap for his helmet, which of course it is. Anyways, so this is a character, like, ignore the shift. You're not going to shift this out almost any time unless you're looking for, like, a rush type thing with a 4/5 body, right? But it's very unlikely you're ever shifting this out. So let's ignore that for a second, right? Not the vanilla stat line we're looking for. The vanilla stat line for a 5-drop is a 5/6/1 lore, so we're losing 1 strength and 1 willpower. What do we get for that? Your locations get an additional 2 willpower. Normally, I would tell you in draft, locations are awful. You should not be drafting locations in draft unless it's for ink, or, you know, every once in a while you just have to play one because you don't have another option. If you do that, make sure it produces lore if you can. It so happens in this particular set, there is what I would argue a very good draft location that already has 8 willpower. So giving it 10 is nothing to scoff at. So I'm not drafting this high. This is probably still a D, but maybe it's a high D, low C. In that it's not a horrible stat line. It's still a big body. But if you're drafting a lot of an amethyst location we're going to get into, it might be worth including some of these, or at least picking them up, not highly, but picking them up, period. Like if you're in the last 4 or 5 picks of the pack, and you might normally take something that's a little bit better quality than this in a vacuum, but you know you've got a couple of those great locations, it might be worth picking this up. So don't sleep on Mr. Niceland Steward here. All right. Christoph. So, in draft, normally you would want your top end to probably cut off at 6. 7 is debatable, but 6 is normally where you want to cut things off, right? 9? Definitely not, right? However, there's this series of cards that the cost gets reduced, right? And some of them I'm actually pretty excited about. But Christoph here, again, you're not having a lot of songs in your draft, and certainly drawing them all in an order that would reduce this enough to actually be playable is not happening. I know I said Bodyguard's great, but this ain't the one. Pass on this one. Draft it if you need it for your constructed deck, but otherwise pass it. And by the way, let's stop shaming money rare drafting, right? If you open a cracked legendary for constructed, but it's garbage for draft, you take that legendary. Come on. Speaking of which, though I don't think this one's even necessarily going to be good for constructed, we've got Mirabelle Madrigal. You're not going to have 5 other characters in play in draft unless your opponent's losing horribly, in which case you've already won. So, yeah, she is an F. She is ink. I will give her that. Oh, by the way, Christoph's a hard F as well. All right, Minnie Mouse, Drum Major. So, 5 cost, 4/4, 2 lore is not the vanilla stat line. It's 5 cost, 5/5/2 lore is the vanilla stat line that we're looking for. And even then, not fantastic, but definitely playable, right? So we're losing 1 strength and 1 willpower. What are we getting for that? If you shift her, you can find a character and put it on the top of your deck. Now, we're going to talk a lot about card advantage in draft. Card advantage is a huge way you win your draft. Without card advantage, you tend to run out of assets quite early. and quite often before you are about to win the game, right? Unless your opponent's playing super slow and you're playing super aggressive, you're going to run out of assets without card advantage. Let's be clear, this is not card advantage. This is card selection. So first of all, you're not getting the advantage. You're only getting your choice of character on top of your deck. But also, to do that, you have to lose a character, which is to say I already had a character on board. I shift Minnie on top of her. So I've effectively given myself card disadvantage because now I've got 2 cards in one body, right? So this is card disadvantage. However, it is card selection, right? So where would I want to play this? Well, first of all, as a vanilla stat line, it's not awful, right? It is, I would argue, a solid D that I'm not embarrassed to have in my deck. The shift ability, do not value a slightly better character on top of your deck than the average character. In other words, if you've just got a solid deck of playables, then you're just as happy with a random character most of the time for the effort that it takes to make this work. If you got some bombs in your deck, okay, then there's an argument, right? But it's got to be significantly better than your random character or card that you could draw to make this worthwhile. So I still think it's a D, but if you've got some of the lower cost minis, the ones that you actually want to play, so namely there's a 3-drop that's worth playing, and there might be another one that I'm forgetting, but okay, worth picking her up, but do not value her highly at all. She's a bit of a trap. Okay. Speaking of it's a trap, I mentioned card advantage being important in draft. And you should know that in draft, a good percentage of your deck is characters. Very high percentage. So if my opponent's playing this, there's a good chance that it's going to net me a card every time it quests. A really high percentage, right? And the thing is, we look at this in Construct and we think, so? That doesn't matter. She's just really putting us ahead of the game. And that's true, but you've curated a deck and constructed that matches the pace of Daisy here and can really go aggressive. Whereas in a draft, you're going to have a hodgepodge of aggressive and card advantage and board control, and it's not really going to mesh with Daisy here. Couple that in the fact that she's uninkable, and yeah, you drop her turn 1, you might be feeling okay, but I remove her on turn 3, you've quested for 4, but you've drawn me 2 cards, and I am almost certainly going to win that game. You draw her late, and it's even worse, unless, again, you're in one of those situations where the board's clear and you just need to quest, right? For a few more lore. So, Daisy is probably an F for me, maybe a D. But, yeah, I wish it worked. She's going to be amazing and constructed. Do not get me wrong. But you really need to make sure you're not conflating something that's good in constructed with something that's good in draft. All right, Fix-It Felix Jr., the baby Fix-It Felix. This is probably the one that they're intending you to shift onto with the 4-5. But, again, locations in draft are usually garbage. Again, there is one in this set, maybe 2, that are reasonable to play. One that I would argue is even really good. But again, can't think of best case scenario. You can't think of, oh, I'm going to be drafting a couple of these locations, so let's put this in. You said I needed card advantage, Heath. Sure. But again, that's best case scenario. What's the likelihood that you actually draw your location and this and want to play it in an order and a sequence where you'll actually draw the card off this? Because the one that I'm talking about in Amethyst is a 3-drop. So am I wanting to play this on turn 4 as a 1/3 body just to draw me a card? If I had the location out, yeah, I probably would. But again, that's best case scenario. So this is a D-. This is like a low D. Probably should be an F, but I'll give it a D for inkability. I hate that it goes back to the start, by the way. All right. So I talked about how Daisy Duck as an aggressive card isn't worth it because the rest of your cards don't really match the pace. Well, that doesn't mean you never want to draft an aggressive card, but you don't want an aggressive card that's so all in that if you can't match the pace, that you're really putting yourself behind. On the other hand, Moana here is giving us 1 willpower over that vanilla stat line I talked about, the 3-drop, 3/3/2 lore. Admittedly, those are inkable, and she is uninkable, but that 1 extra willpower might mean the difference between her questing 2 or 3 times and questing once or twice. And on a 2 lore body, that can make a big difference. And that 3 strength, especially in the early game, is getting rid of almost anything that challenges her. So I really like Moana here. I might even argue this is an A. Probably a low A, high B type thing. There's definitely a lot of cards that I would want to take over her. But I would be pretty satisfied, I'll say, to take her first pick. Right? So, good on you, Moana. Okay, there's a lot of Vanellope cards in this set, eh? So we got Vanellope von Schweet's Sugar Rush Princess. So 4 cost 2/4/2 lore. So we've already established that the vanilla stat line is 3/4/2 lore for a 4 cost inkable. When you play another princess character, all opposing characters get -1 strength until the start of your next turn. There ain't enough princess characters that you actually want to draft for this to be relevant. And I already established that shrinking something by -1 strength is not that big a thing, right? The great thing about her is that you don't have to quest for it, so you don't have to expose her to risk. But on a 2 lore body, you're probably wanting to quest with her regardless. So, no. Another D. Again, a 2 lore body, especially with 4 willpower, I'm going to include in a deck begrudgingly, just because every once in a while, that's enough, right? But you should not be looking to take Vanellope. You should be taking her when the rest of the pack is uninkable, unplayable, whatever. All right. We're on to Mr. Alan O'Dale, which I'm just going to say, I love this character. I'm not sure I realized that was his name. I love the song. His main song. Obviously, I know he sings a bit. But I love this movie. I love the character. He's awesome. But I'm not sure I realized that was his name. Anyways, we're getting off topic here. We've already established that this is way off the vanilla stat line, and you're not playing a lot of songs. It's a D ranging on F. Yeah. We already established that the 3 cost 2/3/2 lore was a D. So this one's even worse. Constructed, might be afraid, but otherwise. All right. So we established a little bit earlier that the top of your kind of ink range should probably be 6, but there's a debate for 7. Why is that? Let's take a moment and establish why that is. Right? So think about this. You want to be keeping pace with your opponent. If they don't drop a 1-drop, you can probably resist the urge to drop a 1-drop unless you feel like you're kind of racing for lore a bit with your deck. Right? Which, nothing wrong with that, right? Get ahead on lore can put a lot of pressure on the opponent. Good strategy, right? But ultimately, if they're dropping a card a turn and you're not dropping cards, you're going to fall behind real quick. So let's assume for a moment that you have to play at least 1 card per turn, right? Especially if you're on the play, you start with 7 cards, you ink a card, you play a card, I'm down to 5. Next turn I drop to 6. I ink a card, I play a card, I'm down to 4 with 2 lore. Next turn I drop to 5. I ink a card, I play a card, I'm down to 3 with 3 lore. Or 3 ink. Someone in the comments is like, he said lore instead of ink! I see that all the time in people on YouTube. And I'm always like, oh my gosh, he said lore instead of ink. Yeah, it's easy enough to do, isn't it? Good job, Heath. Next turn we drop to 4. We ink a card, we play a card, we're down to 2. Next card, we drop to 3, ink a card, play a card. We're down to 1 card with 5 ink. Next turn, we drop to 2, ink a card, play a card. We got 6 ink and no cards in hand. So what happens next turn? We draw a card, and it's our 7 drop. We've got no cards left to ink, and we've got 6 ink on the board. We're stuck for a turn without being able to play anything. That might not be detrimental, but it definitely could be, right? So 8 ink, almost out of the question without ramp, and we'll talk about that when we get into Sapphire. But 7 ink is questionable, right? 7 ink is going to necessitate you, especially on the play, holding back from playing a card on at least one turn. So if you're on the play and you know you got a 7-drop uninkable in your deck, 1, if you have it in your opening hand, mulligan. And 2, you're probably going to want to not play a 1-drop, right? So 7 is doable, but be very cautious about 7, right? So now let's talk about Ralph here for a second. So 7 cost uninkable, not very palatable, but what is he worth it, right? So we got a 6/7 2-lore body, nothing to scoff at. Below the vanilla stat line, but nothing to scoff at here. However, when you play him, you can return a character card from your discard to your hand. If it's a princess, you gain 2 lore, but we've just established with Vanellope, the number of princesses you're actually going to want to play are really small, so you can fairly well ignore that ability. If you get it, great, but don't draft this based on that ability unless for some reason you've drafted a bunch of princesses, which you probably shouldn't have. But returning a character card while still getting a really decent body on a 7-drop, I would take that. I'd be hesitant to play this, but I'd still pick it up. Now, should you first pick it? Because it's never coming back, right? It depends on what's in the pack. I'm going to say this is a B. I'm probably being aggressive in that. Because, again, that 7-drop uninkable is no joke. But I still think it's going to be worth it just because getting a character back and getting a really decent body is oftentimes going to be worth it. So I'm going to say B. I like it at B, which means I'm not happy to first pick it. There's probably going to be other, there's commons that I would absolutely take over this, right? But I still think that you're not going to be ashamed to take this first pick. And ideally, you're hoping to get in picks like 2 to 4, right? All right. I really hate having to scroll down each time. Maid Marian. God, lots of Robin Hood characters in this set, and I love it. Alright, so 6 cost 4/5/2 lore, well below vanilla stat line. When you play this character, chosen opposing character gets -5 strength until the start of your next turn. Anybody remember Scar from the first chapter? This is just the stat lines flipped. It was pretty good in draft, but it was relevant a lot less times than you'd think. Which is to say, the number of times where someone's got a really big body exerted on the other end of the board, and you've got the characters that you want to challenge into it, even if it had 0 strength or much less strength. In a timing where you could and wanted to play Maid Marian, or Scar in the case of the first chapter, was lower than you'd think. I still think it's a worthwhile ability. I still think it's a worthwhile card to take, but I would probably still call this a C. It's going to look a lot more powerful than it is. But there's going to be times where you're going to be so excited to play this, right? I would definitely put this in a C. I'm not sure where in C, much like the 4 cost 4/4 that I was talking about earlier. I'm not sure where this is exactly going to live in C, but I would call that a C. All right. Sven, Reindeer Steed. Love that guy. 4 cost 3/3/2 lore, so it's 1 above the vanilla stat line. But what do we get for that cost? Well, when you play this character, you may ready chosen character, and they can't quest or challenge for the rest of the turn. Okay. So, this is very much like a lot of the abilities we've had in the past, right? But in this case, it's not just can't quest, it can't quest or challenge for the rest of the turn. So why would we want to ready it? Well, hopefully that's obvious. It's to protect something, right? Sven's getting in the way. This is actually going to be pretty useful. Not crazy. Not amazing, right? If it was can't quest and you could still challenge, it would be better, obviously. Anytime you're removing a restriction, it's better. But I would say substantially better. But the fact that you could protect, this is almost like a one-turn bodyguard, right? You can protect the character that's producing the most lore or the most vulnerable for a turn. And if it happens to have an ability, we're going to talk about in Amethyst, about a character that's got an amazing ability, then you can use that. Right? So you could potentially double tap a good ability. So, very useful. Not so far removed from vanilla stat lines that were offended by it. I would still call this a C, but it's almost certainly going to be a very high C. Might even be a low B. Minnie Mouse. This is one I didn't notice for a while. So I think I'd already made a lot of my assessments before I was looking at it. But I was trying to equate her to Pluto from Ursula. Right? Ursula's Return, we had a 5-drop, 4/5/2 lore, that on play removed damage. I think it removed more than 2. I think it removed 3 damage. But anyways, it removed a decent chunk of damage, right? And I love that card. Great draft card. Top end, right? So you can't draft a ton of them, but great 1 or 2 of. Is this better than that? Well, the fact that you have to quest and expose her to risk isn't great. The fact that she's only got 1 strength, and that's not going to do much in terms of trading with anything if they are challenging her. She's going to be a mild annoyance to the characters that are challenging her. Not great. But 5 willpower is pretty solid on a 4-drop. 2 lore, pretty solid on a 4-drop. And then the fact that you can remove damage. Normally in draft, I don't care about removing damage. It is such an inconsequential thing most of the time. Again, you're going to tell me there are situations where it's amazing to remove damage. Oh my gosh, I salvaged a character that is my bomb, and they couldn't get rid of it the following turn because I removed some damage. Yeah, there are best case scenarios for everything, right? Alan Adale, somehow I draft a bunch of songs that don't completely lose me the game. Sure. But at the end of the day, removing damage is usually not that consequential. But repeatable removing damage on a 2 lore body, if you can protect this behind Bodyguard, amazing. If you can control the board quite well, amazing. Other than Bodyguard, because that controls the board itself, right? I think this is probably a low B. I'm gonna have, this is one I feel like I want to play with some more to see how she survives in the set with the characters that are in it. I'm just kind of talking in a vacuum here, but it feels like this is probably a low B. All right, we're down to try everything. Okay, we're now into the actions, which the actions, items, locations in a lot of sets are going to be pretty underwhelming, and there's no exception here. Just mentioned removing damage. Not that relevant. Readying a character, fine, but we already established with Sven that that the fact that you can't quest or challenge isn't great. We're paying the same as Sven without a 3/3 lore body. Yeah, I can sing it, but then I'm probably using a character I'd rather be questing with or challenging with. Singing songs is amazing. Don't get me wrong. Singing songs is fantastic if the effect is powerful and relevant. And this one just isn't. This is a D, maybe an F. Probably should be an F, but we'll call it a D. All right. This one, I feel like I wanted to like more than it's actually going to be impactful. So Healing Touch here. 3 cost, inkable, remove 4 damage, draw a card. We love card advantage, right? We want to draw cards. I already established removing damage isn't that impactful. And 3 ink is a lot of ink to pay to not really affect the board. I want to be drawing cards on things that still affect the board. You can argue removing 4 damage affects the board, and maybe it's my Bodyguard that can all of a sudden control the board more. Or my beater, my challenging character that can challenge more as a result. It's not irrelevant, right? But I've rarely found situations in the test drafts I've done so far where I've got the time for this, where I've got the inclination to pay 3 for this effect when there's so many other things I'd rather do. So this is going to be a C. There's very few times where a card that says draw card on it is a C for me, but this is. At least for now. I'm more than happy to be proven wrong on that. Revive, 5-drop uninkable. Play a character 5 cost or less from your discard for free. This is one of those situations where you're going to give me your best case scenario. Oh, Revive is awesome when. Great. How many times is this going to be stuck in your hand because it's uninkable, or because all you've got in your discard right now is a 1-drop 2/3, or heck, even a 3-drop, right? Yeah, this ain't it. This ain't it at all. This is a hard F. Alright, Blast from the Past, same idea. Worse because it just goes into your hand, and how many times are you going to have all character cards with the same name? No, that's an even worse F. Invite to the Ball. This one I overlooked for a little bit, but I've done more testing. And I mentioned that the majority of your decks in most drafts are going to be characters. So this could often be 2 cost, draw 2 cards. Pretty good, right? Even on Inkable. However, in this set, there's already some locations that I want to be playing if I can draft them. And there's at least a few actions. So, and especially if you have like 2 of these, you're diluting your deck more. Chances are it's still going to be a 2 cost draw 2, which is pretty good. But I think there's going to be plenty of times where this is unnecessary, especially since it's uninkable. So I'm going to put this as a low C. But it could be more powerful than that, especially in the right deck, right? Know what's in your deck as you're drafting. And if you can get this late and your deck is almost entirely characters, then it's probably going to be pretty good. Right? But don't draft it early. Nope. It's ink. It's a D. It's not an irrelevant ability, and it's inkable, but it's mostly relevant. Okay. Queen Censor. You're not going to have a princess or queen. I'm sorry. You might. You have best case scenarios. There ain't a ton of princess or queens in the set that you want to draft anyway. And even if you did, having this out at the same time as having that out and taking the time to play this, and it's at the start of your turn, so they can always remove your queen or princess before the start of your turn. And if you try to use this to dig for queens or princesses, you have drafted wrong. This is, I mean, is it a D because it's inkable? No, it's probably even an F because its ability is even more irrelevant than Healing Decanter. It's an F. Amberchromicon. Why do they have this and the other remove damage? So this is remove up to 1 from each of your characters. The other is remove up to 2 from one character. But they're both 2 cost, inkable, exert to use. Why are they both in this set? That seems like a superfluous amount of healing items. You guys are getting lazy here. Come on, step it up. You know what? I probably shouldn't even zoom in on cards like that. I should probably just leave it there. I'm wasting time by zooming in on cards that don't matter. Rapunzel's Tower. I've actually played with this in a couple of test drafts, and it's not awful because it's inkable. And 1 cost to give your characters an additional 3 willpower, while having 8 willpower of its own, is not nothing. But it also doesn't produce lore on its own. So I would play this if it was like the last cards in my deck, and I'm like, most of the time I'm going to ink this, but every once in a while, I might pay 3 to put this out, slap this on one of my characters that's about to trade with something, and it will thus survive, and not be too sad about it. So this is like a high D for me, but it's still a D. Pride Lands, no. Again, if you have to, it's inkable, it produces lore, it's got 8 willpower, it's not nothing, but you're not going to have 3 or more characters here. And if you did, you're probably not going to have a ton of characters in your discard that you even want to banish this for to bring back. No. It's a low D. Probably should be an F. Especially for 2 costs to move them there. I gotta pay 6? Revive is cheaper than the ability on this? No. No. Bye. That's Amber. That's it. That's all. How much time are we at? I have no idea. I'm not tracking it or looking at it. But I think it's less than 45 minutes. All right. Again, we're going to be doing an in-depth analysis of the key cards. Not in-depth. We're going to be doing a summary analysis of the key cards sometime after I've released all the colors. So if you want a kind of refresher, rather than having to look through all these again, I'll have kind of a refresher summary piece. I'm going to try and keep under like 20 minutes for all the colors and the key cards that you want to be looking for coming up after all the colors are released. If one of you watches this all the way to the end, you are amazing. This is my first video since like September, something like that. Oh my gosh. I've missed this. I've missed you all. I've stayed off Twitter because it hurt to see everyone having a good time and enjoying the game and enjoying the community and all that, because I wasn't able to be the part of it that I wanted to be. So I've missed this and you, and thank you all. The fact that anyone's still subscribed to me is wild. You're just too lazy, aren't you? You were just too lazy to click unsubscribe. You forgot that even existed. I went down to the bottom of your subscriptions, and you forgot that it was even there. And you're going to see this ping in your subscribed feed and be like, who is this again? It's me. I'm still here. I love you all. I'm dragging this out, but it's been amazing. Thank you all, and we'll see you soon.